So let's take a look at how we're going to cut out the pork pie hat. So what I've done is I've printed out the pattern size that I want, which is the large for this one, and I've printed it out twice, and then I've actually stuck it together. Sorry about the taping, but it means you can print it out on A4 sheets. And it's given me two separate circles. And what I've done underneath, and I'm doing this with a different coloured lining so it shows up a little bit more, I have got my main colour. What you're going to use for your main colour, you want that to be the bit that you actually put the interfacing on. I've used it on this Liberty print so that you can see a bit better what I'm actually doing. And I've cut a square of my contrast, my main fabric and my interfacing. I ironed the interfacing onto that square. I think you can see it. Pinned all three layers together. And then I've actually laid my pattern on, and then I've drawn round my pattern onto my fabric, and I've then drawn round the center as well onto my fabric. You then need to make sure that all these markings that you've got, the 4 points on the brim and also on the top of the hat here, make sure that all those points are marked on both of your fabrics. Okay, I then cut up to one of those marks. It doesn't really matter which one. And then what I've actually done, and that's why it's easier to draw it, I think, is I've then cut around the outside circle. I've done some of it just to speed this process up. So I've cut around the outside circle first, and I'm cutting through all of those layers. Okay, then you can see what I've done there. You just cut in to one of those points, and then you can cut that center circle out. If you're making a bit of a patchwork version, obviously you can do these pieces all separately, but I think it works better if you can to cut them out at the same time, so that if there are any slight differences, well, there won't be any slight differences because all of these should be the same, so you'll know how they're going to work together. So once you've got all those bits, we can then take out pins out because they are done. Okay, so this part is going to be the brim of the hat, and these two are going to be the top of the hat. And we're going to actually be making two hat top and crown, and then the brim is sitting on one of those. Okay, so if we get that out of the way, I'll just show you the cutting for the other bits. So the pieces for the crown that are going to go around, again, I've interfaced the one that's going to be my main colour, but I haven't interfaced the other one. One lot of interfacing, I've used a medium weight iron on. One lot of interfacing is enough. Okay, this piece, I have measured it and done it so it is, you've got a little bit of ease when you're making this pattern. Okay, and I've done that on the actual turn up, the pork pie part of the hat as well. What I wanted to show you here is, if you wanted to, what I've done here, and this is a little bit of a hack really, you can just use the same fabric, which I've done on several of the samples, but on this one I've actually cut 2 strips here and stitched them together of my 2 different fabrics. And I've actually, this needs to be 3 inches, so I've cut 2.5 inches there and 1 inch there, or you can do 1.5, as long as it comes out with your 1/4 inches to 3 inches, that's fine, because what's going to happen there is when I actually come to fold that over, I'm going to get that nice effect of almost like a piping going around the brim of the hat. So I just wanted to show you that option if you wanted to do that. On some of the other samples, I've actually done fancy stitching on the brim, and you'll see that in those pictures on the front of the pattern. So that's all your cutting out, and the first piece we're going to actually do, and I've done the cutting out here, and I've just ironed on 1.5 inches, which is about half of interfacing onto this. I don't need the whole thing interfaced because that would make it really stiff, so I've just done the half, and that's the first thing we're going to sew. I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm just going to sew across both ends and then turn it through and press it and then top stitch it like I've done in the pattern. So I've gone to the sewing machine. So I've gone to the sewing machine and I've stitched across both ends of the brim here, and then you can see I've just literally clipped off the corners so that I can then turn that through. You might want to use a knitting needle just to get that point out in the corner. Just go gently. I normally use a wooden one because they're not quite as sharp. So take those points out, and then what we're going to do is press this, and you can see, as I said before, because I've done these two colours, it almost looks like I've got a piping around the top. Let's get those out of the way. So you do want to press rather than iron. I'm using a linen here, and what I would say with linen is definitely a bit of spray starch before you sort of start, because linen does tend to shift around a little bit, and I find if you spray starch it, then it behaves itself while you're actually going through the process of sewing. Okay, so we're just pressing that in half as we go along all the way down to the end, and then what I'm going to do is go into the machine and top stitch this. This is the point where if you wanted to do a decorative stitch, which I could do, I think I'm going to leave this one plain because I just like that effect there. But if you wanted to do a decorative stitch, you do it on here while it's flat. Don't try and do it when it's all curved into the hat, because that's just making life too difficult. So I'm going to top stitch and I'm going to go along here, and then I'm just going to come in under that little piped edge. Okay, so if you were doing it all in one colour, you'd just have this effect, but because I've done the two, I've got this effect here. Okay. So the thing that I would recommend for this process, because it's quite fiddly, I've actually got what is called the adjustable zipper foot on my sewing machine. If you have a narrow zipper foot for your machine, then perhaps use that. But I find for these sorts of projects that it's much easier. We're going to be sewing in curves and things like that, and it's quite difficult to get to them. So I find a narrower foot makes this job an awful lot easier. And I'm top stitching here. So the center of the needle is here, and I've literally got about a scant 1/8 of an inch here to the side of the foot, so I can use the side of the foot as my guide. So I'm just going to go up this end. You didn't like the beginning there because it's linen and linen frays, so there we go, but that's going to go into the seam. And then I'm just going, you can see I'm running along here so that I can run all the way along this bit. There we go. Once we get started, ease underway. So the side of the foot I'm just putting up to the edge of the piping. If I was doing this all in one colour, I'd be doing it up to the top of the fabric, okay? But because I've done this sort of piped effect, I'm doing it this way. And this top stitching is also going to help to stiffen it as well, okay? Just that extra bit of stiffening. It's not a stiff hat, it's still going to be a soft squishy hat, but we do need a little bit of body to it. So we're now going to insert this turn up in between our two brim pieces. So you can see I've marked with clips well, I don't need to mark this one because that's obvious where that is. So I've marked the other points and I've marked on both, because this is now going to sandwich between the two, and I've marked the center. I've just folded this in half to mark the center, and this is the right side that I'm considering it the right side, the bit that's going to show at the front. So what I'm going to do is place that in the center here, right side to right side, and then right side to right side, so that that straight brim is now going to end up sandwiched between those two layers. Okay, and take your time with this part of the process, because I'll show you again. So I've got the top there, this is the right side, this is that right side is facing this right side, that right side is facing this one. So if it makes, I'm hoping that it makes sense, you just seeing it, but you're doing the top one is right side to wrong side of the turn up, right side of the turn up to the right side of the main color of your brim. Okay, I think it's more obvious just showing you, to be honest. And then we're just going to go round clipping, and do use a lot of clips or pins for this process. Okay, and what we're trying to do is don't stretch, be tempted to stretch these, because they're cut on a circle. There is a fair amount of give in there, but we don't want to stretch these out, because what you'll find is that when you get to the end, you'll end up with one piece of your brim not matching the other. So you might find that you have to do this a couple of times before you get it right, but as I say, try not to stretch these two curvy bits. The one that's interfaced is fine, because that's a little bit harder to stretch. And you should, as you go round, you've got those points marked, so your guideline is that these should match. And I think you can see there we are putting a straight edge between two curved edges here, so just kind of bear that in mind and push that down. But like I say, try not to stretch those curves out. Often you're actually stretching things to fit, but on this occasion you don't want to distort. Okay, so I'm slightly off piece there, so I'm just going to clip that for a minute and then just see what is happening here. So yeah, I might go back in and I'm going to clip at that end, one there and one there. So I've got my 1/4 inch seam where I can sew down there, and then go back through. And that's why I start in the center, because as I say, you might find that you need to just go around this. This is probably about the trickiest bit, really. There's an awful lot of this, just trying to get these fabric manipulation, just getting these bits to fit. And as I say, I find clips easier than pins, because when you actually take it to the machine, it doesn't matter then, you're not worrying. They're a lot easier to take out more quickly, I think, than pins for this sort of a job. So I'm coming from that end and I'm just coming back in to the middle, and I can rejig what's going on here, because look, that will bring that back into line. So keep on fiddle faddling around with this. It will bring it back into the center as we go along, and if you need to give it a little wiggle or a little stretch, then do, but do try to be very gentle. And if you are stretching one of these curved pieces of the brim, stretch both, not just one, because like I say, that just means that they won't sit right when you do it. I think this is the bit that you are probably going to find the trickiest, and the answer is to just keep on going round until you get it to fit. So you could clip here, but I think one clip in the center and then just one clip at the end is enough, and then you don't have to worry overly about what's going on here as long as it kind of fits. Okay. Yep. So where do we get up to? We got up to here, didn't we? So I'm going to take those out, and I am going to stretch this out very slightly. If you're finding, and it could be for reasons of cutting, because you know, no matter how hard we try, sometimes it just does not work, does it? You could go back in and take a bit off there, but I have already top stitched it, so I don't really want to do that. So I'm just pulling that out very slightly as we go round. The nice thing about using these clips as well is that you can kind of see better how it's all lying. And this is where that narrower foot comes into its own, because we are going to do a 1/4 inch seam there. And if that, see that one there just dropped down, so I'm going to put another clip in there. Oh, I think I've run out of clips. This is the only trouble. You need so many clips, and I've got clips on all manner of UFOs in this room. And one day I will gather them all up and I'll have thousands of clips. So let's find the pin cushion. Oh, there we go. It's a pin cushion. Take that round. I'm not going to speed this bit up because I kind of want you to see how long this bit will take. Don't expect it to happen instantly. But can you see those two are now matching up? So as I say, you might find that you need to kind of go around a couple of times, just shifting and moving things very slightly and stretching, etc., etc. But you are manipulating straight to curves here. So I'm got another clip there, and I'm going to put a pin, and just make sure that all of those 3 layers are here, because otherwise when you go around stitching you might find that you miss a bit. So the last bit on here, so I'm going to try and pull that bit out a little bit, but not pull that straight bit. I don't want to stretch the straight bit on here, but I don't want to stretch the top bit any more than the bottom bit, because otherwise it's not going to meet here. So put that one in, and I'm going to put another one in between. And as I say, pin, pin, pin at this part of the process. With all parts of this hat making process, pinning is definitely the way to go. So we're just about there. Okay. If you are worried about your cutting, then what you could do is, before you actually top stitch that brim piece down, you could measure it up, because frankly, if you were to take an inch off of that before you actually stitch it, it's not going to do any harm, because the design of the hat is that it overlaps, so that you're not having to worry about fitting everything exactly, which I think is one of the hardest things with hat making. So there are a couple of parts of this process where I've tried to make it a bit easier, so that you can actually adjust as you go. So you'll end up with it looking like this, and this is what you're aiming for, that these two ends are meeting. Okay, so that it will all sit once it folds over, and this is what's going to happen, is that's then going to sit whoop, up like that. Okay, once it's stitched. So I'll take that to the machine, and I'm going to stitch down here and 1/4 of an inch all the way around and then back up. Okay, so don't forget, because we're doing that 1/4 inch, make sure that this part of the brim is 1/4 of an inch in, so that you're not stitching that into this seam here. Okay, so I'm now going to start stitching around here, and as I say, this is, I think, where this narrower foot really comes into its own. So I'm just going to take one more stitch to get me up there. That's it. And then start stitching around the top. And as you take the clips out, just keep an eye on what is going on underneath, because this is quite a narrow seam. We're doing a sort of a 1/4 inch really here, so it's quite a narrow one, but we want it narrow because that will help it to curve up, and you won't have to clip all those curves if you do it quite narrow. And just keep a feel of what's going on under here, so that you don't get, because you'll be able to feel if there are sort of creases going on underneath, because you're trying not to get any tucks. Okay, you'll feel a sort of a crease at this, I don't know if you can see, at this point here, but you don't want to feel it down the bottom here, so you're almost like smoothing the fabric out as you go around. So just keep on a little bit at a time and keep adjusting. And if there is a crease, push it. There was a crease there, so I've just pushed it back behind the needle so that this now is flat. There's a bit of a knack to it, so you might find this a little bit tricky the first time you do it. But as I say, all these processes are pretty much, you know, whatever hat you're making, you're going to use this part of the process, so the more you do it, the easier you find it. So I'm just coming into the end here, and then as I run it up the edge, I'm going to take that clip up and just make sure that that bit there, I've just tucked that underneath so it doesn't get stitched into that seam by accident. Okay, so if I snip the corners here, bring you back out so that you can see, when I turn this through, I think you can see straight away that, look, that will start to sit up proud as you go around. And just make sure that you've stitched, you can check both sides, make sure that you've caught everything in. You'll see straight away. If you've missed anything, just go back in and restitch. Okay, but I'm turning that through all the way up to the end, and I'm going to again use that knitting needle to just get those corners out. I don't think I did that at the other end, did I? So just get that out at that end. But like I say, look, you can see, can't you, that, and I will give this a good press in a second, but you can see how it actually starts to sit up proud as you go around. And then go in and give that a press, which I will do in a second. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a top stitch all the way around, and we're going to go nice and close in here so that it's going to hold those two bottom layers, the brim, together, and we're going to top stitch just in there so that this bit will sit up. Okay,